Here we go. Hey there, everyone. Welcome to Goway's webinar series. Today we're doing a three-pronged attack. I'm speaking to Mandi Stefanak, who's actually located in Los Angeles at the moment. And she's the North American representative of the Northern Territory in Australia, from where I am originally. I'm actually sitting in a basement in Toronto amongst snow. Mandi, I guess it's much sunnier in LA as it usually is.
It is, yeah. Beautiful day outside, almost 80 degrees today. Really can't complain.
Yeah. Jealous. I'm actually flying. This is actually quite fortuitous. I'm actually on a plane tomorrow, flying back home. My son is in Australia doing some traveling and work. So I'm actually off to Australia tomorrow.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. But as I said, we have a three-pronged attack today. We are going to focus on Northern Territory, obviously, but also the gateway, an alternative, I wouldn't say an alternative, another gateway into Australia, being Brisbane and Brisbane Airport itself, and how to get there with being Virgin Airlines out of North America. So we're going to discuss all three. So we'll get going on that. But before we do, we always like to ask our guests to give a little background on themselves. So Mandi, who are you? We know you're in LA. How did you get involved with Northern Territory?
Yeah, all good questions. So I've been representing the Northern Territory here in North America for almost 8 years now, which feels a little crazy. But yeah, I actually come from a public relations background. So I got into the industry and working in travel through a PR agency where I was doing some PR for other destinations. Found my current role at MMGY, where we represent Northern Territory among a few other destinations around the world, and really started learning more about all the different facets of the business, marketing, trade relationships, educationals, that kind of thing. So I've expanded a little bit outside of PR, and now I actually oversee all of the Northern Territory account here in North America. So just every tactic that we can use to encourage North American travelers to go visit the NT. That's probably part of my plan and what my team works on here. So been doing that for quite a while. Been to Australia, I think 11 or 12 times at this point. Absolutely love it. Feels like I've found my home here promoting Northern Territory. So yeah, just very happy to be here and sharing some information about the NT.
Wonderful. So we will focus on the NT, but again, there'll be touches on Brisbane and Virgin as well, getting there.
Yep.
So for those who may not know the Northern Territory, or NT, as Mandi's referring to it, she's becoming very Australian by shortening words. So Northern Territory down to NT. There might be a few others we'll throw in there. So the Northern Territory is literally the central territory, not a state, territory of Australia. So you have Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria on the east side, Western Australia naturally on the west. The Australians call it as they see it. South Australia, southern, and of course above South Australia, in between everything I've just mentioned, is the Northern Territory. And it's sort of, Australians refer to the territory, and again, it's often referred to as the territory.
The territory,
as our sort of centre of the country, because it geographically is. But within that centre of the centre, we have a very famous site, which we'll focus on today as well, and its surrounds, which is now called Uluru, which is the First Nations name, Uluru. It was once known as Ayers Rock, but it is Uluru. So I have sort of given away a bit of my next question. It's in the heart of Australia, but can you be a bit more specific of where Uluru is, please, Mandi?
Yes, I can. So if you look at a map of the continent of Australia, it's almost smack dab right in the middle of the continent itself. So it is pretty far towards the southern part of the Northern Territory. So it's not too far from the South Australia border. So it's right there, kind of tucked away in the southern part of the Northern Territory. So right in the middle of the heart of the outback. So that's why we like to call it kind of the spiritual heart of Australia. It's right there in the middle of the continent, and it is a very spiritual place.
Yep. Now, as I've mentioned, I actually just did an interview with Sean Marsh from Dupuya in New Zealand, and our subject of conversation was the Maori culture within modern day New Zealand. And I'm very proud as an Australian to see, since my upbringing to later, that Australia is now recognising, and I think we've always accepted, but recognising and giving credit to the First Nations people, the Aboriginals. I've grown up with many names, Aboriginal names around me. They're just commonplace. But as I mentioned earlier, Uluru as the rock, it's now known officially, was once Ayers Rock. Can you explain, other than the recognition of the traditional owners of the land, why it did change from the colonial name back to the traditional name?
Yeah, so I think in general, there's been a lot of efforts done in Australia to kind of recognize, as you said, and return land to the Aboriginal communities that have called those places home for, centuries, millennia, potentially. So back in the 80s, I believe it was 1980. Actually, 85, that sounds right, I think was the official handover of the actual land of where Uluru is back to the Ananu people. So as part of that, it's been, it's kind of slow education, but, Ayers Rock was the name given to the rock far later, after Aboriginal people had been there for quite some time. And that was obviously a Western name that was given to the rock. So I think now it's just kind of working to acknowledge that the rock had a name before white fellas named it. And we're just trying to go back to calling that what the Aboriginal people had named it originally. And that doesn't apply just to Uluru. There's actually lots of locations all throughout the Northern Territory where we're working on going back to referring to those points of interest and locations by their Aboriginal names. So for example, the namesake of the national park, Uluru Katajuda. So Katajuda is the actual Aboriginal name for the other rock formation in the park, which some people might know by the Western name, which is the Olgas.
Yep.
So just an example of some other ways that we're working on going back to using the Aboriginal names for those important places.
Yeah, and again, when I was growing up, the political was turmoil, I guess, at the time was the Aboriginal peoples seeking to regain ownership of the land. A lot of it was symbolic. One of the highlights was the Aboriginal peoples of Gadigal, which are the peoples of the Sydney area, were claiming the Opera House and everything there because it was their land before the colonials. But practicalities wasn't going to make that happen. But obviously areas like the Northern Territory, it was a practical solution. And as Mandi mentioned, it's not just the renaming, it's the ownership of the land has been returned to the First Nations people who monitor it and govern it. So any money spent there is going back into the Aboriginal tribes there, which is a real positive as well.
Yep.
So I also mentioned just very quickly there, the rock. It was often, colloquially known as the rock because now, again, I'm not sure if this is still, I shouldn't say it's still a fact. I was brought up on the fact that it is one solid rock, hence why everyone shortened it to the rock. So can you just touch on the geological significance of Uluru?
Yes, I can. So I am actually admittedly a geology nerd a little bit. So okay. I love this kind of stuff.
Okay, cool.
So yes, Uluru is actually one big solid rock. It is also an Inselberg, which maybe we don't know what that name is, but it basically is the word for it's like an iceberg. So you know how when we see an iceberg on the water,
yes,
you actually know that majority of that is underground. So Uluru is actually the same thing. The majority of the rock is actually still situated underground. So we're only seeing a small portion of it. However, the difference between Uluru and Katajuda, the other large rock formation in the Northern Territory and within the national park, is Katajuda is actually more of a conglomerate. So that's, pressurized pebbles and boulders pushed together to make larger rocks themselves. Right. And Katajuda looks quite different than Uluru because, Uluru is one cohesive rock, whereas Katajuda is actually 36 different domes that all kind of come together to comprise this rock formation. So we have Uluru, which is one rock, Katajuda, which is many. So if that helps kind of explain the geologic differences between the two and how they're both kind of special in their own right.
Right, and as Mandi's been speaking there, for those watching, we'll be throwing up some video of the two areas. So Great. It's you can see what she's referring to there. Now, I know that the two rock formations, Uluru and Katajuda, are not that far apart. So from a visiting point of view, you can do both in a day. But what's the distance between the two areas?
Ooh, that's actually a good question that I don't know off the top of my head, but I can look up that.
While Mandy's looking it up, I can tell you it's a short drive because
it is.
I'll just fill some space here. Many years ago, I went home with my family. I have a wife and 3 boys, and we hired an RV, or a camper van as they're called in Australia, and we drove from Darwin, which is the top of the territory on the coast, all the way down into Uluru and then onto Katajuta. So I know it's a short drive between the two.
Yes.
But Mandy's just looked it up, and the exact distance is...
I believe we've got about 56 kilometers. So it's about a 40
miles.
Yep, 40-ish minute drive between the two.
Yeah. So my point is you can visit both. If not in the same day, you can definitely combine both together. Now, what is so special? Again, I've been there. I know a bit of history. We've already touched on in regards to the traditional owners. But why is Uluru one regarded so highly by the traditional owners, and why do you think you've been there? Probably we mentioned 11 times at least. What is so special about it being it is a rock, albeit a very big rock?
Yes. So I think there's a few different things that make Uluru so special. I think there's a really interesting theory that I was actually told one time by one of my guides at the national park. Because that rock is an Inselberg, like I said, the majority of it is actually underground. There is a theory, because Uluru is a sandstone rock, and sandstone, when put under pressure, does turn into quartz, which we know a lot of cultures around the world kind of use quartz as, a spiritual connection, or they feel a special connection to that. Mm-hmm. So there is a theory that perhaps the bottom of the rock of Uluru is actually a large quartz rock down at the bottom, and that may be why some people feel such a spiritual connection. Now, that is a theory. There has never been any testing done or anything like that, and that's in part because the Ananu Aboriginal community has not wanted any kind of testing done, or obviously like digging down underground, they prefer not. Yes. So, and that's of course okay. But that is just a very interesting theory that I heard one time, and made a lot of sense to me, because a lot of people just do feel, especially the Ananu people who have regarded Uluru as a special place of, it's been a meeting place. It's been a place that they can say, let's all gather here. There's evidence, if you do the Mala walk around the base of Uluru, you can see where there's been kitchen areas that have been used over the years, where you can see still the remnants of the smoke or the grinding bowl areas in the rock. So it's definitely been a point of importance for the Ananu people for a very long time, both as a spiritual place, a meeting place, a gathering place, and a central location in the outback. I think on its surface, if you see it, it's just amazing to see. It's this, mostly flat land out there in the outback, and then just this massive rock sticking out of seemingly nowhere. So it's just visually very, very cool to see as well. And then I think the last thing that people tend to find really special about Uluru is its color changing properties. So it's so well known for the color change between, the lighting that we see right at sunrise versus the bright lighting that we have in the middle of the day. The rock itself can change drastically from a deep dark brown color to this bright, vibrant orange color, depending on the lighting that it's in. And so that's why those sunrise and sunset experiences are so special at the park as well.
Yeah, and again, when I was down there, I'm sure you've done it as well, we did both sunrise and sunset, and I work here with a lady, Moira from South Africa, who looks after Africa department, and she's always prancing around the building. African sunsets are the best. African sunsets are the best. And they're pretty spectacular. I'm not going to argue that point, but I'd say the sun going down or coming up over Uluru is equal, if not better at times. It's, as you say, Manny, the color change is amazing. It's stunning. And the other thing I wanted to just sort of highlight as well, you touched on it briefly, that it's in the middle of Australia, and I don't know the exact stat, but I'm going to sort of generalize and say I think 80% of Australia is desert. Like the centre, beyond Uluru and all around Western Australia, it's desert. And talking Northern Territory, most of it is flat, as you mentioned, and this rock pops up out of nowhere. But what you mentioned before as a gathering spot, when we step back from the modern day traveller point of view, looking at the beautiful sunrises and sunsets and clear skies at night, back in the day before white man was there, or the white fellas, as they're referred to. This was like a gathering spot. So the First Nations tribes, the traditional landowners came from everywhere to this center to meet and then wander off again. It's quite amazing when you think of that they were traveling through the desert to meet and also just surviving out in the desert. So on that note, when we were there, not at Uluru per se, but we did some traditional owner experience guiding trips as well. So when someone is visiting in and around Uluru, Katochuta, from a guiding point of view, my understanding is many of the guides, if not all, are of the traditional owners, so Aboriginal blood, and therefore the information you're getting is like truly firsthand.
Yeah, there's a lot of employment both at the national park and at Voyages Ayers Rock Resort that are, empowering that local community to share their stories and their personal background and connection to the land. So I think a lot of the times people tend to think that they have to kind of actively seek out Aboriginal tourism experiences. But one of the really nice things about visiting this part of the country and the Northern Territory in general is that the Northern Territory has the highest population of Aboriginal Australians within the state compared to any other state. So, a lot of the tourism experiences inherently are going to be worked by the Aboriginal community, whether that's through tour guiding or driving the boat or, the car that you're in or whatever it may be. So it really is an inherent part of tourism in the Northern Territory is giving back to and supporting those communities.
Yeah. And again, I highly recommend that if you can seek out one of those truly Aboriginal experiences. And we did that. It was actually in Kakadu further north. Yeah. But the guide we had was a woman called Patsy, and she was actually from Arnhem Land, which is a very sacred part of the Aboriginal culture where you have to have special permission to visit if you can get in at all. Yeah. And her knowledge and just her storytelling, it was just amazing. Yeah, and more so for our kids. They were blown away by it. It's one of the highlights of that was having that Indigenous experience, so which you can get at Uluru as well. Now, you mentioned there the Ayers Rock Resort. So from a location point of view, let's get into some of the logistics. Getting into Australia, and in this point, getting across to Uluru, we want to highlight Virgin. So can you touch on their lift out of North America in the gateway being Brisbane, the advantages of that, please?
Yes. So Virgin Australia actually does not have direct connectivity into the United States currently, but they do have a partnership with United. So there's a lot of seamless options for flying with United into Australia from the United States. And then, of course, the domestic connectivity is very impressive. So, yes, we are, of course, highlighting Brisbane. There is a great 3 times a week flight from Brisbane to Uluru. So that makes things very convenient for connecting off the coast. That 3 times a week is Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. So pretty frequent for those flights. They also have connectivity into Uluru from Melbourne as well. And that is a new flight that they've added also. So that's up to 3 times a week, a little bit more seasonal, but when it is 3 times a week, it's Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. So in terms of their other connecting markets from Uluru, they do have quite a few routes that are offered on Virgin. So Brisbane, as I mentioned, also Canberra, Cairns, Melbourne, as I mentioned as well, Perth, Sydney. So tons of connectivity in and out of the Red Centre, which is great for, the Red Centre in Uluru and getting to see the rock and pairing that with other destinations throughout Australia.
Yeah, and a good reason to use Brisbane as your in or out gateway, because you could do an open jaw like come into Sydney, Uluru, out Brisbane, in Brisbane, etc. But Brisbane itself, it's not just the airport itself, which is a great airport to fly into, but Brisbane itself is just north of the Australian Gold Coast and Sunshine Coast. And Brisbane, north of that, you have Fraser Island, the largest sand island in the world, where you can see dingoes. And from Brisbane, as Mandy's already alluded to, it's a great hub to get to Cairns, Uluru, Darwin, etc. So it has a lot of accessibility in its close proximity, Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast, Fraser Island, etc., and then getting to Cairns. And a very popular combination when people go to Australia would be Brisbane, Uluru, and then Cairns, which is the gateway to the Great Barrier Reef, and or all the above, and then down into Sydney. So Brisbane is, an equal gateway into Australia. Back in the day it was Sydney, 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 but now it's definitely Brisbane and Sydney, and to a lesser degree Melbourne, but we are here to highlight Brisbane. Sure. And then, as Mandy's mentioned, Virgin throughout all of Australia have a great network to get you in and around. Now, when you do fly from Brisbane into Uluru, you don't actually fly from an airport code point of view. You do fly into Ayers Rock Airport. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Yeah. So the rock itself is traditionally or officially named Uluru, but the airport holds its old name, Ayers Rock. Do you know the airport code off the top of your head?
The airport code is AYQ.
Okay.
Uluru, yep.
And that is how far is Ayers Rock Airport from? So you have Ayers Rock Airport. You then have the rock itself, Uluru, Katachuta, and we've just discussed this, sort of like 50 odd kilometers, 35 miles ish between each other. But the central point to visit both these areas is, what was it called? Ayers Rock Resort.
Yep.
So what is that?
Yeah, great question. And first, I do just want to go back to like the naming conventions, because I do get a lot of questions about this, and I find it to be pretty interesting. So a lot of people do ask, we're going back to calling the rock by its Aboriginal name, which is Uluru. So why not change the name of the airport to Uluru Airport and change the name of the resort to Uluru Resort? But actually what the Ananu people and what the Uluru family, which is one of the Ananu families in the area, has said is that, what they care about is their spiritual place, which is the rock itself, going by the name that they've given it. The airport and the resort doesn't really have any, significant cultural importance to them. Right. So from their perspective, they're like, you can call that airport and the resort whatever you want to call it, but please call our rock by the name that we've given it, which is Uluru. So I just, when that was explained to me, I was like, oh, that actually does make kind of a lot of sense. So that's why the airport and the resort have kept the Ayers Rock name. And then in terms of Ayers Rock Resort, what it is, as you said, that's basically the hub for everything in the Uluru-Katajuta National Park area. So there's actually even a little town, if you will, called Yalara that's kind of popped up from the resort, all the employees who work there and all the people in the community who have come to contribute to the Ayers Rock Resort, community and offerings that they have. It is a hub, as I mentioned. It's not just a hotel per se. It's called Ayers Rock Resort, but it's actually a collection of several different accommodation options, as well as a little town center area. So there's everything from a little, convenience grocery store to a hair salon to a coffee shop. So there is kind of a little town that has popped up just for the infrastructure in this area. So at Ayers Rock Resort itself, you've got lots of different accommodation options to choose from, everything from a campground for, pulling up your RV or popping up a tent, up to a 4.5-star property at Sails in the Desert. So they've got everything in between: the Outback Hotel and Lodge, which is targeted more towards budget travelers and families. They've got a great barbecue dinner that you can do out on their patio area there. The Lost Camel is more of a boutique hotel offering. Emu Run Apartments, great for families and couples traveling together. Desert Gardens, which is the 3.5, 4-star property, which is the only property there that actually has views of the rock from certain rooms where you can book rock view rooms. That's Desert Gardens. And then Sails in the Desert, which is their highest quality accommodation option. So that's all available right there at the resort. Yeah.
So when we were there, we were in Ayers Rock Resort. I think we were at it was a small apartment that we had. So
it might have been Emu Run. Yeah,
it might have been Emu Run. Yeah, and it was great because again we had the kids and we parked the RV up. And what we found about Ayers Rock Resort, as you say, it's not so much. Well, there are resorts there, but it's like a little town. This little community, and there's lots of things to see and do just around there. Now, from an accommodation point of view, you just went through those there. Sales. What's the attraction to that? Because it's probably one of the more picturesque and famous sites of an accommodation choice when you're looking at Uluru.
Yes. I think the appeal there is just the property itself is beautiful. Large lawn outdoors with a pool in the middle, and all the rooms kind of surround that lawn area. It does have a spa on site. It also has on-site dining. It's just a really nice property with great, Aboriginal culture kind of infused in the design of everything. And the rooms are very large too. They also have some really nice category rooms that have large patios with day beds outdoors and really nice lounge areas to enjoy the outback sun. So it's just a really nice property with lots of amenities included as well.
Right. Now, the area, again, is owned by the traditional peoples. It is a national park. So you can't just camp wherever you want. So anyone who's sort of looking to rough it, you just can't roll up on the side of the road and camp anywhere either, can you?
Correct. Yes. Right. So that is why Ayers Rock Resort also has the campground option for those who would like to do that. Okay, fine.
So just going back to logistics, something else I'd like to point out is another famous town in the area is Alice Springs. Now, Alice Springs was created when they were putting the telegraph from South Australia to Darwin. running the telegraph, because they were then going to connect the underground cables that ran from Australia to England, and that was a big thing. And Alice Springs was one of these little posts along the way that was set up for the crews doing that. And it's since grown into a little town in itself. There is a US presence there. There is a US military presence, a famous place called Pine Gap. So it's a vibrant, thriving little town. But a lot of people might think that you can get to Uluru from there, but it's not like Ayers Rock Airport, which is close by to Ayers Rock Resort and the rock itself. Alice Springs is about 468 kilometers away. So I'm guessing we're talking about 350 miles, about 5-hour drive. So from a logistics point of view, agents out there, when you look at, you want to fly them into, as Mandi said, Ayers Rock Airport for that easy convenience to visiting the rock and Katachuta. Now, on that note as well, other than the rock, which we've discussed, what else can you do in and around Ayers Rock Resort and Uluru itself?
There is so much to do at Uluru Katajuta and at Ayers Rock Resort. Of course, going to see Uluru, doing the base walk, doing the Mala walk, visiting some of those points of interest is probably the most famous thing, or, doing the sunrise or sunset viewing, of course, from afar. But as we touched on earlier, there's actually a second rock formation that's also in the park called Katajuta. So we really recommend also going to spend some time at Katajuta. There's a few different walks that you can do. For instance, for more experienced hikers, there's the Valley of the Winds walk, where you actually can walk between some of the domes of Katajuta. And there's also the Walpa Gorge walk, which is a little bit more accessible. So there's lots of different ways to experience Katajuta as well. But we also have, Segway tours at Uluru, where you can hop on a Segway and go around the rock that way. There's bike rentals available. We also have a really wonderful visitor center and cultural museum that I always recommend people visit to kind of get the lay of the land and some understanding of the Aboriginal community in that area. We also have some really spectacular dining experiences available, like the Sounds of Silence dinner, which is a very popular buffet-style dining experience under the stars. That includes a Star Talk and didgeridoo player. And if you pair that together with the Night at Field of Light ticket, it includes the Field of Light experience, which is the many, many different fiber optic light bulbs that come on as the sun sets, and you can walk through this really beautiful art and light installation just in the shadow of Uluru. We have more fine dining experiences like Taliwiru, which are a plated, 4-course wine pairing style meal with Uluru off in the distance as well. And Ayers Rock Resort actually just launched a brand new native high tea experience for the afternoons as well. Really? So that's a nice way to get a taste of some of the native bush tucker foods through a high tea experience. So tons of things to do and lots of ways to spend your time.
And man, you just threw in a very Australian word there, tucker.
Tucker,
which is general food.
Exactly.
So you mentioned in that there are Segway tours. My question was going to be, because Uluru and Katachuta are very much, walking and trekking. Doesn't be extreme, but it's active. Anyone, if people have any mobility issues, can they get around on wheelchairs in and around the rock and Katachuta?
Yeah, so Uluru, because it is mostly flat around the walk, and a lot of the walk it's going to be dirt pathways, but there's I think Uluru is probably a little bit more accessible than Katajuta would be for wheelchair users. But yes, you can absolutely still do the base experience at Uluru if you're a wheelchair user or need some accessibility assistance.
Okay, now at least to me, and obviously to Mandi, this is old news, but just let's touch on it now. There was a time when you could climb Uluru, which is not allowed anymore. So just putting that out there, and that was again the traditional owners requested that stop. So walk around it, no problems. Touch it with your hands down at the base level, no problems. But you're not allowed on it or over it anymore. Now, the territory, as we discussed, is in the heart of Australia. I mentioned most of Australia, central at least, is desert. When's the best time to go to the centre?
Yeah, so I would say the best time to go, a little bit of a loaded question just because it is such a seasonal destination. So we typically say the season, if you will, is February to October, with the real peak season being June through August. So that would be the Australian winter or North American summer. Yep. And that's just because, as you said, it is the outback, it's the desert, it does get quite hot. That said, it's a year-round destination in that nothing closes down. There's not really, seasonal accommodation or anything like that. So the properties do remain open November through January. And while those are the hottest months, those are also the months where you're going to get the best deals and the least amount of other people there. So if you're looking for a little bit of cost saving or to avoid some of the crowds, you can still do November through January, especially because so much of the programming at Uluru is focused on those sunrise and sunset experiences. So what we always recommend if you're traveling during those months is, get up in the morning before it gets hot, do your sunrise experience, do something in the morning, come back to your hotel, lounge by the pool, do the native high tea experience in the air conditioning, and then go out for your dinner experience and do the sunset thing. So it's still definitely possible to do it during the quote unquote off season as well.
Right. I don't know the answer to this question. How much rainfall does the territory normally get in that area? I know up north, Darwin, you have heavy rain periods around Kakadu.
Yes.
Is the centre pretty much dry?
So it's not actually technically a desert. It's a semi-arid desert. So it means it gets a little bit more rain than a traditional desert might get. However, the rainfall in general is pretty low. I don't know off the top of my head what the average is, but I do know that rain is pretty rare. It's actually very special if you get to see rain in the outback, which I actually was very, very fortunate to get one time when I was visiting, because it rains in the outback and you get waterfalls on Uluru. So we actually got to drive to Uluru and see some of those waterfalls coming off the rock, which was really, really special.
Yeah, I've not seen that firsthand, but I have seen imagery and some video. And it's, when you're so used to it being the rock and nothing else, to see water coming off it in the copious amounts it can at times as well is quite amazing. Just a complete sort of a side question here. In your time when you did see the rain, does the surrounding areas sprout in wildflowers, or is it pretty much just the water off the rock is the sort of the biggest visual difference?
You may see some wildflowers. I think in general, when it does rain or when they have a good year of rain, the desert comes alive with lots of green and it looks, very lush. There's saltbush and, other plants that will kind of come alive. So in general, I think the outback, because it is that semi-arid desert, it gets, a little bit more rain than what we think of with a traditional desert. It is a little bit more green and colorful than people tend to anticipate it being.
Agreed.
So
the rain, I brought that up because as you mentioned, the rain on the rock. When I used to be a travel guy, I spent a lot of time in Latin America. We'd drive down the coast of Peru, which is primarily, it is all desert. And I was up and down that coast. I don't know how many times. I love the desert, sand dunes. And I came down through the area once after an El Nino, and it had rained in this desert area. And what were normally just sand dunes were covered. It was blanketed in these beautiful wildflowers of pinks and purples. Wow. It was just such a dramatic change to what I was used to seeing. So we've touched on, obviously, the rock, Uluru and Katachuta. So if someone's going to go all the way to the centre, because, again, Australia is big, and I saw on, I'm on all these geography things on Reddit and stuff like that, map thing. I like my maps and stuff like that. And someone laid up the size of Australia, and they sort of butted it up alongside the east coast of America. And basically from the tip of Florida all the way up to Nova Scotia was the coastline of Western Australia. Like Australia's big, as most people are probably
very
aware.
Big.
Yeah. So to get all the way from Brisbane into the centre and see those two amazing sites, which are relatively very close together, what else would you recommend someone adds to their time in the territory?
Yeah, great question. So I think, you mentioned earlier on, Alice Springs is not that far from Uluru, so it's about a 5-hour drive. So what we oftentimes see a lot of people do is create a little loop of the Red Center, if you will. And so that's going to be linking together Uluru Katajuda National Park with Alice Springs and looping in Kings Canyon, which is another really beautiful... Yeah, so I would say those are probably the biggest attractions to the Red Center area. Within that loop area, those are the 3 primary points of interest, like I mentioned, driving from Uluru to Alice Springs and to Kings Canyon and back around. And we do actually have airports both at Uluru and Alice Springs, so you could kind of start or end or, however you want to arrange it, but that's a nice way to experience the Red Center. And then even between those points of interest, there's stops along the way. Driving from Uluru to Alice Springs, you're going to pass Curtin Springs and Mount Connor on the way, where you can pull off and stop for a little experience and learn about, that cattle station and the paperworks that they make from the grass on the station, and continue on to, out to Alice Springs and experience the many, many art galleries, Aboriginal art galleries in town, or the Kangaroo Sanctuary, and visit the Alice Springs Desert Park and learn about some of the endemic wildlife in the area. Driving out from Alice Springs into West McDonnell Ranges National Park, where you can do the swimming holes and hiking and points of location and stuff like that. And then Kings Canyon is kind of, if you will, in between. It's north of Uluru and west of Alice Springs, and it's exactly what it sounds. It's a large canyon. It's a really beautiful point of interest in the Northern Territory. You can hike the Rim, which is a very famous walk called the Kings Canyon Rim Walk, which is one of my favorite things to do in the Red Center. It's just really beautiful, and experience some glamping at nearby properties like Discovery Park's Kings Canyon or Kings Creek Station, and visit, Kark Aboriginal Experience, who will tell you all about their Aboriginal traditions and histories, which, are different than those of the Ananu at Uluru, because there's so many different Aboriginal communities within the Red Center, let alone within the Northern Territory in Australia. So there's so much to see and do in the Red Center. Yeah,
100%. And I'll actually, just on that point, I'll throw up a map as we're talking now of all the Aboriginal tribes and languages that sit across all of Australia. It's not, that's the other thing a lot of people don't realize. It's not one tribe or one group. It's multiple, and with that comes different beliefs, or similar beliefs but different languages, and it's amazing. It's an amazing ancient culture that needs to be explored in more depth. And another thing too, just on all the points or the areas that Mandi brought up, as I say, when we did our trip with our kids and they're much younger, we had the RV and we did the King Canyons Rim Walk and Uluru around the base. We did all that with our kids, so it's all like the territory is a very family friendly area in both amenities and education and fun things to do for young kids or even older kids as well. So again, just a bit more on the territory. So that's sort of all around Uluru, Ayers Rock area. Now there is a big lot of nothing in between there. There are some amazing sites to see in the middle of the territory, but generally people would then go from the bottom of the territory to the top of the territory, where you have some of the most famous sites in Australia. You have Darwin itself, Kakadu National Park. So can you just expand on briefly on a few of the options up on the north of the territory?
Yes, absolutely. So as you mentioned, there is a whole lot of space between the Red Center and the top end, and that is kind of evident in the landscapes and what you'll see between the two regions. So if you're in the Red Center, you're obviously seeing the outback and that semi-arid desert, but you go up to Darwin in the top end and it's super lush, green, almost tropical. So you get a lot more of those lush green forests and beautiful swimming holes and waterfalls. As you mentioned, it is very different in terms of climate. So up in the top end, we do have our tropical summer, which means we get basically daily rainstorms, but it makes for some really beautiful waterfalls and fills up those swimming holes. And then we have the dry, which is the other kind of dichotomy of seasons up in the top end. So I love the top end. It's got some really spectacular national parks, as you mentioned, Kakadu National Park with the billabongs and the waterfalls and tons of ancient Aboriginal rock art that you can go see, different points of, lookouts, beautiful lookouts that look out over the floodplains. We also have Litchfield National Park, which is a little bit closer to Darwin and has equally as, beautiful waterfalls and swimming holes. We also have a little bit further south in the top end, but the town of Catherine, which is just outside of Nitmiluk National Park, which is another stunning national park. If you haven't picked up, Northern Territory is a great place for national parks and being outdoors. So it's a really, really nice kind of completely different landscape to what you're going to see in the Red Center, and I think pairs really nicely with the outback, if you can also take the time to come up to the top end and see some of what that looks like.
Yeah, for sure. And that's also in Darwin from a wildlife point of view, or Northern Territory. You'll probably see a bit more wildlife because it is lusher and greener up there. One of the biggest attractions, I can't remember its name, but in Darwin you can go to the crocodile, I wouldn't say zoo
Crocosaurus
farm.
Cove.
There you go.
Crocosaurus Cove.
Yeah, and you can get up and close and personal with the salties, as the Australians call them, the big saltwater crocodiles, which are fearsome and scary. And I think you can get into one of these plexiglass diving things. Is that an option still? Can you do that?
Yes, I have done it actually.
Oh, you have? Okay.
Yeah, so that's called the Cage of Death experience.
There you go.
So you climb inside a plexiglass enclosure, and you get lowered down into the croc enclosure. So you get really up close and personal with them, and they actually do a feeding while you're in there. So you get to see, the power of their jaws and just how large they really are in person. It was pretty amazing. If you can, if you've got the adrenaline for it, I highly recommend. It was great.
For sure. And for people who may want to get a feel for this area, during the 80s when Australia became the bee's knees, everyone wanted to go there through a whole lot of different reasons, things like in excess. One of the biggest ones was a film called Crocodile Dundee, and the first half of the film was filmed primarily up in and around Kakadu. So there's one place to go and get a feel for it. And another movie, the movie wasn't awesome, to be honest, but it backdropped Darwin in the Northern Territory, was the film called Australia with Nicole Kidman and Hugh Jackman. Hugh Jackman. So I was thinking Hugh Grant. Not Hugh Grant at all. Hugh Jackman.
Not him.
Yeah. So that's also another sort of beautiful backdrop to the area we're discussing as well.
Yes.
Before we say adios and goodbye and everything else like that, I just wanted to come back to Brisbane Airport as the gateway. So, I did sort of throw in some reasons why, but I think it's worth highlighting a bit more of why an agent should recommend to their clients, or a client should look at Brisbane as their gateway in and out of Australia. So, Mandi, can you just maybe add to what I said earlier?
Sure. Yeah. So I think on a very practical note, Brisbane is the closest Australian gateway to North America. So Brisbane's actually going to provide you with the shortest flight time from North America into Australia.
That's a biggie. That's a big.
Yeah, that's a big one. It's a big one. Yeah. But in addition to that, Brisbane is just such a beautiful city in itself. It's right there on the river. It has a really lively atmosphere, romantic spots for couples, very family-friendly activities like, Bluey's World, not that far outside of Brisbane for the families. So it's just a really nice, I think, relaxing, leisurely city to, stop over, spend a few nights, take a stroll along, the South Bank parklands, have dinner on the river. They also have a really, really wonderful culinary scene as well. So it's definitely worth getting out and trying some of the food in Brisbane before flying on to the center.
Because Queensland, and particularly southern Queensland, which is basically from the border of New South Wales up to Brisbane, a little bit further north, has always been looked to by Australians as that sort of retirement thing. So, I guess the Florida of Australia, because it's got beautiful sunshine all year, beautiful beaches, and the points that Mandy just brought up, like great nightlife. If you're into theme parks, they're all around that area. You've got Australia Zoo there, the Irwin family, all that type of stuff. So, to your point, it's I didn't know this, actually. I'm into my geography. Didn't know it was the closest gateway to North America. So, that's good. Okay, so, again, as an extension, coming back to Virgin Australia, there are other airlines that fly within Australia. So why should an agent and in turn a client be considering Virgin Australia to get around Australia?
Yeah, so I think VA or Virgin, I say VA, Virgin Australia, they do a great job of, providing a lot of choice and comfort. So they have a choice of, the baseline economy seats as well as economy X, which is a little bit of a plus up from economy in addition to their business cabins. So that just provides a little bit more customization in terms of the class of travel that you're looking for, even on those domestic flights. As we touched on a little bit earlier, they have a really expansive network within Australia and frequency of flights. They also have performed incredibly well on both on-time performance of their flights, of scheduled flights, and they have also been winners of the best cabin crew 7 years in a row. So you're just going to get really exceptional service. They also have seamless international connections with some of their codeshare partners. So we mentioned United, but they also are codeshare with Qatar, Singapore, ANA, and Air Canada. So they've got some really great connectivity internationally.
Okay.
And I'll just rattle off some really quick stats that their team shared with me. They've got 91 aircraft in their fleet. They've got 39 new aircraft that will be arriving over the next 5 years. So lots of new aircraft coming into their fleet. They're also in the middle of a $110 million reconfiguration of their existing fleet. So investing in what they've got. I mentioned that Economy X fare, so that seating configuration actually provides 40% extra legroom. So if you've got guests who might want a little bit more wiggle room, that's a great option to book them in without necessarily needing to bump all the way up to business. And they do fly to 31 domestic destinations on 72 routes. including an additional 5 international destinations on 13 routes. So lots of options and great performance.
Yeah, and I think an important stat there was the code share, particularly with Qatar Airlines, because we have people like myself who are on the East Coast, and generally when I think of going home, going to Australia or the South Pacific in general, it's always out of LA, San Francisco, Vancouver, which means to flight across North America, which is a chunk in itself. But if you can go with someone like Qatar out of the East Coast at a stopover in Qatar on the way down, then you can hook up with Virgin Australia to get yourself around Australia. So that's another good big plus working with VA. So we discussed Northern Territory, all the things to do there. A lot of what you mentioned to me, I knew of and heard of before, other than I think there was the High Tea, which was a new addition to offerings down there. I think since I was down there last, the light show at night has been a new addition on top of the Sounds of Silence, which is a must. If you can get out there and have dinner in the outback. And then we were lucky when we did it, actually, that there was a lunar eclipse that night. So that was a bonus for us.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And as Mandi didn't mention it per se, but we both know that those desert nights are just so deep. And so if you like your stargazing, awesome. So there's a couple of new things to me, but let me ask you, Mandi, for our listening and viewing audience, what is new on the horizon, be it for Brisbane Airport, be it for VA, or be it for the Northern Territory itself?
Yeah, so as for BNE Airport, Brisbane Airport, they said they're actually really working on the transformation of that airport right now. So they have a $5 billion investment planned on coming over the next decade. So it is over the next 10 years or so, but that will include a third passenger terminal, major refurbishments to existing terminals, and, a lot of basically changes just to the travel experience at the airport itself, creating jobs there and preparing for, the Olympics, which are coming to Brisbane not too far from now and beyond. So that's really exciting that they'll be adding and expanding to the airport. From Virgin's side of things, they are, of course, we're promoting these still launched but new routes, which are the routes into Ayers Rock, so BNE or Melbourne into Uluru. They also are very excited to share, and this is specific for Goway agents, that we are offering a special wholesale offer right now on those VA flights. So the routes included in that wholesale offer are, of course, direct from Uluru to Brisbane or vice versa. And same thing, Uluru, Melbourne, vice versa. So those two routes are what we're promoting. And then, of course, like we mentioned, from Uluru, Brisbane, Melbourne, there's lots of connectivity to continue onward to other destinations. But that offer itself is running currently right now through March 31st of this year, and will include some specific travel periods. And, we'll have all the information that we can share and whatnot. But if anybody has any questions or needs anything or wants to get some additional information on that fare offer, VA also has a really great dedicated hub and support team for advisors. So please feel free to reach out to their team with any booking questions or anything you might have.
Okay. And anything for Northern Territory itself, any new and exciting things happening?
We do have some new and exciting things happening. I don't know if I'm allowed to necessarily talk about it yet, though. Yeah, we have some secrets. I will just say 2026 will be a really big year for Uluru. There's going to be a new product coming out in the Red Center, actually within the national park itself. Nice. But yeah, I don't think I can share details quite yet, but it'll be big. So just watch the space, and hopefully more to come soon.
Okay, that, folks, is called a teaser. There you go.
Yes.
Yeah, and as part of all our spotlight with our webinar today and the offer from VA, Goway has also put together a new product. It is the Best of Brisbane and the Northern Territory, naturally enough. So that's on our website now. I'll throw up the URL or the page as we're chatting now. So you can tap into that to connect with your international air, with the code share partners that Mandi's mentioned, UA being the main one out of the west coast of North America, into Brisbane, and then VA to get yourself into Uluru and the surrounds, and then around the rest of Australia. So on that note, Mandi, I'd really like to thank you for your time. It was nice reminiscing a bit as we were chatting about this, my trip with my family way back when. It is a fantastic part of Australia. It's very different to what you will find Brisbane, Sydney, Victoria, Melbourne, they're all beautiful, but the territory is the territory. And as we discussed, even from the bottom half of it, the heart, the centre, to the top, as we refer it, the top of the Northern Territory is different in itself. As Mandi mentioned, it's got the blood life of the Aboriginal peoples running through it, as all of Australia does, but it's definitely focused within the Northern Territory. So it's a must-do when you go to Australia. If you're going to go that far, you've got to get to the centre. You've got to get to Uluru. You've got to get to Katachuta. Mandi, is there anything else you'd like to leave our audience with before we say goodbye?
No, I don't think so. I just really appreciate everyone listening in and learning a little bit about the Northern Territory and our new product that we're developing with Goway, and just really appreciate your time, Don, and glad we got to reminisce on your trips there, and hope you get to go back sometime soon.
Yeah, well, I'm actually on a plane, not doing the centre, but going to catch up with my son who's down in Sydney and get a good taste of Australia. Any questions anyone has out there on the Northern Territory, the centre, Virgin Australia, or Brisbane Airport and all Brisbane and surrounds, you can speak to the Goway destination specialists here. They know their stuff inside out. All the information that Mandi mentioned about the VA offer, anything else we've discussed today, they know about. They're trained up on it. Mandi and her team work with us very, very closely. So what she knows, we know. And if we don't know, we can refer to Mandi, and or you can contact Mandi directly if you have any specific questions about a visit to the Northern Territory. So, Mandi, thank you very much for your time, and thank you everyone out there for checking in with us again. And everyone have a really good time.